I still remember those first initial thank yous and saying that and realizing how freeing it was, not just for the person who brought the problem to me, but for me also, that the expectation wasn't that I was going to solve their problem, and I certainly didn't have the expectation that they were going to solve every problem that they brought. It just sort of level set us to say, no one's taking this personally. This isn't a character attack. This is an assault on your performance. It's just simply like us talking about this issue. And then if we care about our clients, figuring out possible solutions, testing them, and then trying to get better.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tracy O'Rourke.
And I'm Elizabeth Swan.
And we are from GoLeanSixSigma.com. And you're listening to the Just in Time Cafe podcast, where we wrestle with tough questions, talk to thought leaders, discuss great books with authors, and get insights from Lean Six Sigma practitioners.
We let you in on helpful apps. We bring you the news, and we challenge the status quo so you can build your problem-solving muscles.
So, Elizabeth, it's September. What's on our back to school menu?
Yes, Tracy, it is back to school, and today's interview guest is a school teacher turned home builder who has upended the way this country responds to disasters. You know, we've all been tuned into Hurricane Dorian for the past week, and this interview provides great insights on how the Toyota production system is key to helping people recover from disasters. Stay tuned for my interview with CEO and author Liz McCartney. We also got the results of our latest poll, and survey says there are some really impressive organizational cultures out there, which is great. And I was just in Tracy's backyard for the San Diego OpEx conference, where we met amazing leaders, and we'll tell you about some inspirational presentations. And for Q&A, we'll discuss the question asking, has a certain process improvement method flatlined? I know, it's mid-September, Tracy, and you know what that means?
Yes, I do. That means it's going to be a great day at the cafe.
Exactly! Remember to stay tuned for this month's coupon code in order to get a discount on GoLeanSixSigma.com online training.
Let's get to the poll. Well, it turns out we've got a lot of listeners with great organizational cultures.
Yeah, that's true, and that is great news. This month's question was, what is your experience with rapid improvement events, also known as Kaizens? And the answer options were, I have heard of Kaizens, but they're not on my radar, which came in at 10%, and that's last. So Kaizens are on people's radar, which is good. Next up was the answer, I conduct Kaizens all the time. They're part of how we operate, and that came in at 18%. In third place was, I have been involved in Kaizens and I would like to run them myself, which came in at 20%. Second place was the pinnacle. Kaizen is just the way we think, not an event. There's always a better way. And that came in at 24%. And the first place was the answer, I wish I knew more about Kaizens. They sound useful, which makes it the winner at 29%. So of course, since we provide training, we're happy to know that almost a third of respondents want to know more about Kaizens. But I'm equally impressed that about a quarter of respondents use Kaizen as a way of thinking. You know, that's a sign, we see that as a sign of a great culture and a good company. And I'm happy to report that here at GoLeanSixSigma.com, we also treat Kaizen as a way of thinking. We've got an online Kaizen board where we encourage ourselves and our staff to submit ideas and books and articles, infographics, videos, anything they can think of that we could learn from. And there was an infographic just posted on how to be a better writer, which I really appreciated. There's another one just posted on customer journey mapping, which has been coming up a dozen different areas recently. And I love it when there's a new addition to the Kaizen board.
Me too. I love looking at what people are interested in learning and think that it's something I could learn from too. So I love reading that. But I also think that we are pretty good at deciding, why are we doing that still? Do we still need to be doing that? Can't we just stop doing that? And people go, yeah, let's stop doing that here. Mm-hmm. So that's always great. But I really like the idea that Kaizen is about changing the mindset. And it's really been a big focus on transforming culture with many of the leaders we've spoken to on our podcast interviews and on site. It's not just about training on tools when we talk about process improvement. It's about transforming the way people think and showing cultural respect so that people can actually apply the tools. So those are really key.
Yeah, I like that term, cultural respect. So please chime in on our next survey question. The question is, what is the biggest struggle you've seen when using the fishbone diagram, also known as the cause and effect diagram? This is a hot topic since it's one of Ishikawa's 7 essential quality tools, and it's a key tool in the analyze phase of DMAIC and the plan step of PDCA. And it's a way to get at what's causing the problems being addressed. And not everyone knows how to get the most out of this tool. So chime in and choose one of the following options. 1, there's not enough potential causes listed on the diagram. It's not quote unquote bony. 2, failing to include causes learned from process, AKA Gemba walks, and the data. 3, listing solutions instead of causes. An example of that is quote unquote lack of training. 4, not combining with the 5 whys to dig past symptoms and get to root causes. And 5, failing to verify root causes after digging to past symptoms. So weigh in, let us know your preferences, and we'll discuss the results with you on our next episode.
I'm Tracy O'Rourke, and you're listening to the Just in Time Cafe podcast. We would love your feedback. Please leave us a review on iTunes or our website, and don't forget to subscribe. Up next, it's In the News.
I got to hang out in your backyard, Tracy.
I know. I was so excited that you came out to San Diego. Although you had to leave Cape Cod to do that in the summer, and that's a hard thing for you. I know.
It hurt me.
We just got back from this year's 8th annual OPEX Summer Business Transformation Leader Summit in San Diego. So we wanted to let you know how it went. It was me, Elizabeth, and our Client Experience Director, Kelvin, joined up with Angela Miller and Cindy Hansen of UC San Diego Extension. We had a combination of GoLean6Sigma.com and UC San Diego booth. And we've had a long-standing partnership with UC San Diego Extension and these 2 fabulous women who run the Lean Six Sigma program. I've been teaching at UCSD for almost 5 years now, and last year we added the online Greenbelt, and this fall it will be the maiden voyage for the online Lean Six Sigma Black Belt course. That course begins on September 16th, and there are still a few slots left if you want to build your skill set. It's a great course, and you achieve a Lean Six Sigma certificate from UC San Diego and the certification from GoLean6Sigma.com.
And UC San Diego was just named the number one public university in the country again this year. So they are good company. We spent some time at the booth meeting folks, and then we got to see some great presentations and participate in some pithy discussions. One of the first keynotes was by Donna Handley, Senior Vice President of Hartford Healthcare in Connecticut, and Mohammed Saleh, a frequent guest at the cafe, and Donna's senior sensei throughout their lean transformation. The 2 of them had this great dialogue, and they unpacked their journey through this transformation. And Donna was really candid about things that happened, including that the first year was, she described as being really dark. But what comes through is her humility and her resilience, and which is critical in a leader. And I'm really looking forward to having them as guests at the cafe, so you all can hear more about how to bring, about massive positive change to a healthcare system. Another great presentation was by Nicole Raimundo. She's the Chief Information Officer for the town of Cary, North Carolina. And her IT department studied how long it took to process work orders, right? When you request something of the town, or the town has to get something done, there's a work order, and it was a piece of paper. And she included this really scary photo of a desk that was buried under reams and reams of paper. And it wasn't a stock photo. It was actually the before picture of the woman's desk who handled the work orders. And clearly there was a long lead time. So they studied how the citizens of the town communicated when they weren't dealing with the town. And they made use of that same technology that the people in the town were using. So people can now text if their trash isn't picked up. They can use the dining app Open Table to book public tennis courts, which I still can't figure that one out. But they also use Amazon's Alexa. So stay tuned, since she'll be a guest on an upcoming episode. We'll find out how the town of Cary became, as they call themselves, Gov Rebels. And we're thinking of them right now because Hurricane Dorian is bearing down on the town of North Carolina. So hoping they all stay safe.
Definitely. And I really enjoyed her presentation a great deal. I really hope that Gov Rebels spreads like wildfire because they had some really innovative ways to do their processes. And if you're in government, I would highly recommend seeking out the town of Cary and finding some best practices there.
Yeah, and become a Gov Rebel.
Yes. And one of the most inspiring presentations of the entire conference was by Joshua Boudry, president of Lipstick Skateboards. He approached the podium on a skateboard, which was pretty cool and hard to do because it was carpeted.
Think about that.
And as a teen, skateboarding changed his life, and it really inspired him and really motivated him. And he actually was sponsored by some companies as well. So he had some really good success with it. And now his company distributes skateboards to impoverished children all over the world. You could feel his compassion for these kids and a passion for what he does in every word. He was so inspiring. And I was very compelled to just jump on stage and start talking to him, but I didn't.
Excellent restraint, Tracy.
Yeah. I might have to, I might be perceived as a stalker or something.
Yeah.
So he also, what I really loved about the presentation too, was not only was it moving and inspiring, he was one of the best presentations on demonstrating robotic process automation, also known as RPA. And so he explained that he has two bots, Ethan Bot and Lily Bot, they're named after his children, and how these bots can actually run certain processes. So I think what's interesting is RPA, robotic process automation, is often seen as something we do in manufacturing. We create robots to do certain tasks. But Josh showed a great example of using RPA for administrative tasks, desktop tasks. He showed us how the robot could take an online order, open multiple applications and sign in, type the data provided into delivery, fulfillment, and billing. And then Josh gets to let the bots do all the work while he works on his skateboard tricks. So that was an eye-opener for me because I've heard a lot about RPA, but that was the first time that I saw a really good example, and I got really excited about it. And so I really enjoyed his presentation for just part of the inspiration as well as the information and education. And I had the honor of interviewing Josh for an upcoming podcast, so stay tuned for that.
It's funny because that morning we saw another presentation on RPA, and you know how I love acronyms. And yep. I'm sarcastic in case anyone doesn't remember my my anti-acronym rants. The presentation before or earlier in the day mentioned RPAs, but never spelled the acronym out. And we didn't know what it was or what it did. And there was Josh, this, skateboarder, nonprofit organization that showed us all about it. So that was just a great, as you say, now we really got it. We got excited about it.
Right. It was sort of like RPA. Does he mean robotic process automation or something else? Because, there's lots of acronyms that mean different things depending on where you go. Yeah. So it would have been nice to have that spelled out earlier in the conference. And finally, the last segment of the conference, Elizabeth and I stuck around to facilitate a panel discussion for the Women in Leadership Day. It was a group of about 40 women, and I walked away feeling connected and inspired. It really felt good to make connections with other women, and it truly felt like a supportive network. I really liked the format. So for some of the day, we had table topics, and there were discussions at these tables that were happening simultaneously. And so there was table topics around work-life balance. There was a table around the importance of mentorship, diversity and inclusion. There was a lot of robust discussions in these supportive environments. And we talked about really, really good discussions on some of these pieces. So we got to run a discussion session, Elizabeth and I, on how to advocate for ourselves. And we had Sally Toyster, a Wonder Woman of Quality, join us. She's the Operational Excellence Leader for the Marriott. And there will be another Women in Leadership Conference in January at the OpEx Conference in Orlando. So we hope to see you there. And men are welcome too. And I just want to say a big thank you to Beth Hampton and Sophie Boyle from the PEX Network for putting on such a great event.
Hear, hear. I'm Elizabeth Swan, and you're listening to the Just in Time Cafe podcast. In a short while, we'll get to hear my interview with Liz McCartney, CEO and co-founder of SBP and co-author of Getting Home. Next up, it's a question that's been making the airwaves.
So this question is worth answering, Elizabeth. Is Six Sigma dead?
It's a good question, Tracy. This is a recurring question. It comes up every so often. And I realize that one of the goals of people writing articles and asking this question is to stir people up and get them talking. And they focus on firms like GE or 3M, and they use them as benchmarks. And you and I love this question since we can use data to answer it. So on a simple level, Google Trends show a rise in popularity for the term Lean Six Sigma, since 2004. So that's a long time. And we've seen success using the combination of methods, Lean and Six Sigma, but ultimately leadership engagement is a critical factor. I'd say it's the critical factor. I understand the focus on GE because when Jack Welch ran General Electric, he brought Six Sigma in and he made it mandatory. He required everyone to get trained and certified. And if you didn't, you couldn't get promoted. Tracy and you and I both spent time at GE in the mid-90s. So we saw the culture up close.
Yes, we did. And my first day at GE was actually in Greenbelt training, believe it or not. And I actually left GE the same year Jack did. And that was, serendipitous. Actually, not serendipitous, just a coincidence. But in terms of what happened after Jack left, there's a host of broader strategic decisions, we can call them mistakes, that his successor, Jeff Immelt, made that ultimately led to their downfall. And it was obvious that Immelt wasn't a fan of Six Sigma. And once leadership support is gone, it's all downhill. So is it the actual method that dies, or is the leadership focus what dies?
Yeah, I just want to know more about how you ended up leaving the same day Jack did.
The same day. Did I say the same day? I said meant the same year.
I'm reading into it. I just want to know what's going on between you. But okay, seriously, you're making a great point, Tracy. With all the continuous improvement efforts, much depends on leadership. We know that. And Six Sigma efforts go wrong and lean transformations fail, as do other named efforts, when there's not appropriate support from the top. If there's not attention paid to the respect for people side of the equation. So Deming's teachings, which these articles quote, are very much alive. But Jack Welch was actually one of the last of the successful, what I would call a top-down style leader. And the leader as hero style leadership is really outmoded because it makes succession difficult. Right? If you're the hero, who could follow you? In the case of GE, his handpicked successor, Jeff Immelt, he probably never had a chance. And the most successful companies today are those with interactive leaders, the kind of leaders who delegate, trust their people, and talk to everybody. Whether they choose a Lean Six Sigma or Lean, what matters is the cultures that they foster.
Absolutely. And there does seem to still be folks in the Lean camp versus Six Sigma camp. And it's probably obvious to many that we support both methods, as evident in our name. Although they use different methods, Lean obviously is based on PDCA and Six Sigma uses DMAIC. They both intend to have the same desired results, which is improved customer experience, improved productivity, engaged employees, and problem-solving culture. And we continue to see really great success out there. We have so many success stories that we want to share. We actually have a backlog to publish all of these great stories. We see governments, nonprofits, universities, manufacturing, finance, endless businesses in the private sector making huge strides and building amazing cultures. So you really can't argue with the data. Lean Six Sigma is alive and thriving.
Hear, hear, Tracy. It's time to announce the coupon code.
This code is for 20% off any of our Lean Six Sigma training and certification courses. That's white belt, yellow belt, green belt, black belt, and lean training.
Since you joined us at the Just in Time Cafe, just use coupon code 20SPICE. That's 20SPICE during checkout. Make sure to use it soon since the coupon code will expire on the 15th of October.
Coming up next is today's special. Elizabeth, give us a little preview of your interview with Liz McCartney.
It's appropriate that we've been discussing women in leadership in this episode because Liz McCartney left her job as a school teacher 14 years ago, and now she's the CEO of a multi-state nonprofit that is dedicated to helping the victims of disasters. And I'm sure that she and her team are watching Hurricane Dorian right now to see where they're needed. She'll change your mind about who's vulnerable to floods, tornadoes, hurricanes, earthquakes, and fires. And she talks about the easy ways that we as a nation can respond and help our neighbors and ourselves. And she's an inspiration, so stay tuned. My guest today is Liz McCartney. Liz, welcome to the cafe.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Liz is the co-founder and CEO of the St. Bernard Project, which is now known as SBP. SBP is a national organization headquartered in New Orleans. They recognize leaders in disaster resilience and recovery, and their mission is to shrink the time between disaster and recovery. In 2006, after spending 2 weeks volunteering in New Orleans, 6 months after Hurricane Katrina, she and her then boyfriend, Zach, thought they would make a one-time 2-week trip to see how they could help. But once they saw what needed to be done, they quit their jobs, left their lives in DC, and moved permanently to New Orleans. Liz and her now husband, Zach, recently wrote a book about their journey from unskilled volunteers to national organizers called Getting Home. They started learning what it took to rebuild houses for hurricane victims. Then they figured out how to organize volunteers and how to partner with other organizations to make it all happen quicker. In 2008, Liz was named CNN Hero of the Year for her innovative work in helping Katrina survivors return home. And in 2016, she was nominated as a CNN Superhero of the Decade for her continued work in disaster recovery in South Louisiana following devastating floods that summer. In recognition of her dedication, Liz has twice been named a White House Champion of Change, once in 2011 and again in 2013. And in 2011, she was awarded an Urban Innovation Fellowship at Tulane University to scale and replicate SBP's model across the country with support from the university. I have already bought multiple copies of Liz's book to share her story with friends and family. I secretly hope some of them head immediately to New Orleans to volunteer for SBP. But in the meantime, I've got a few questions for you, Liz.
Oh, that's great. Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate your interest in what we do.
Absolutely. So you and Zach had a life in DC, and you were a middle school teacher and Zach was a litigator. And my suspicion is that you were both very good at what you did. So I'm curious about what was the conversation between the two of you? What possessed you to head to New Orleans 13 years ago?
Well, I think like so many people, we saw what had happened in New Orleans. You know, we saw it in the news, we read it in the media, and we felt compelled to go down and help. And so we recruited my mom, who had just retired, and the three of us went down to New Orleans. And candidly, like 6 months after Katrina, I was thinking, well, I'm sure that things have made a lot of progress, and we probably won't even need to be here for the whole time. And then when we landed here in New Orleans and drove through the city, it was just shocking to see the devastation. There were literally houses on top of cars, cars on top of houses. There were still homes that, you know, had been pushed into the middle of the street, that were splayed open, and people's belongings were strewn everywhere. There was so much debris all over the neutral ground and all over sidewalks still. It was clear that this storm had left in its wake so much destruction and devastation, and there was still a lot of work to be done. So we decided after our initial 2 weeks, when we had met some really inspiring, resilient people down here, that we couldn't just go back to our lives in DC. We couldn't just say, you know, goodbye, good luck, I hope your recovery goes well. And so we had a pretty quick conversation that went something like this: we need to do something, says Zach. And I say to him, I don't know what we can do. We've never helped after a disaster, and we've never lived in New Orleans. And then that was it. And we decided that we were going to move here and just try and help in some small way. We didn't have a plan. We didn't have very much money. We just knew that people really needed help, and that we felt compelled to support them in their recovery journey.
Well, that makes total sense to me. I
I'm glad.
Yes, no, I'm just impressed that you made that decision, that you let go, of a life that, that you had and entered into this new one. And I visited shortly after as well. And our friends were in the French Quarter, which, he had tiles on his roof waiting to be installed. Like there was a stack of tiles, roof tiles, those ceramic tiles that they were out of town when Katrina hit, and they were sitting there. They hadn't moved. And then he took me on the tour of the Ninth Ward, which was exactly what you described, this shocking houses on cars and cars on houses. So, but it moved you to change your life, which is an amazing move. And part of your journey was having people from the Toyota Production System Support Center, known as TSSC, and they came to visit. I think in your book you said they told you were a mess. And here you were doing, it sounded like some pretty good stuff. You guys were building a lot of houses, but they helped you look at your processes. So what would you say was your biggest learning from that group from Toyota?
Yeah, so we were so fortunate to meet Toyota about 5 years after we had started operating in New Orleans. And we had hit a point where we kept inputting money and people and resources, but the output wasn't matching that. And it started to get pretty frustrating. We found that we weren't able to produce at the level that we thought we should be producing at. And so when Toyota came in and looked at our systems and were very candid with us and basically said, you have a lot of work here to do to create a clear process and to create accountability. I think the first and most important lesson that they taught us is that you can't achieve any of that without addressing your culture. And the big piece of the culture has to be around getting people comfortable with surfacing and solving problems. And one of the first questions they asked us when they came in and after we gave them our grand tour, and we thought we had really impressed them, the head of TSSC and other folks from Toyota that were there said to Zach, so Zach, does your group talk about problems? And Zach's sitting there nodding, saying, oh yeah, we talk about problems. And everybody else in the room who's on the staff is shaking their head saying, no, we don't talk about problems. And we realized from that very initial interaction that like patting each other on the back and feeling good about our work wasn't going to get us to the next level. That if we were really client focused and wanted to achieve a greater impact and help more families home, we had to be really comfortable getting uncomfortable and talking about things that weren't working in order for us to achieve sort of the level of output that we all wanted to achieve.
It's a definite must. I think one of the phrases they use is no problem is a problem. If you're saying our processes are fine and there's no problem, that's an indicator, that's a red flag, because there's always a better way to do it. And I think culturally, I just visited Japan, and I think culturally, we are not okay with failure. We're not okay with acknowledging problems. So that's a very big shift for a lot of people who feel kind of betrayed, like you've shown them up somehow. If you say this doesn't work, it's somehow a comment on a human being, and people can feel attacked. And I think because of that, you changed your hiring, didn't you? Or not hiring, you changed your screening process. Is that fair?
Yeah, we certainly changed our screening process. We thought more deliberately about the types of questions we wanted to ask to make sure that we were bringing people on the team who were comfortable not only being a part of that culture, but helping us to develop it further. The other thing that I learned early on from Toyota is that when people brought a problem to us, the very first thing that we had to say was thank you. Because if we didn't welcome feedback, and if we didn't make it comfortable and safe for people to bring problems to us, then we weren't going to actually build that culture. And so I still remember those first initial thank yous and saying that and realizing how freeing it was, not just for the person who brought the problem to me, but for me also. that the expectation wasn't that I was going to solve their problem. And I certainly didn't have the expectation that they were going to solve every problem that they brought. It just sort of level set us to say, no one's taking this personally. This isn't a character attack. This is an assault on your performance. It's just simply like us talking about this issue. And then if we care about our clients, figuring out possible solutions, testing them, and then trying to get better.
And I think the other key was that it's a positive. Like, you thanked them.
Yeah.
You're telling them it's a good thing you did this and I'm appreciative.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, we became so comfortable with this idea of building a culture of problem solving that one of our core values for many, many years has been constructive discontent. So we want our team to constantly be improving and to never be satisfied. The trick is getting people to talk about problems in a way that's really hearable. You know, we don't want it to be a turnoff. We don't want them to create a culture where, you know, people are feeling unsafe or feelings are being hurt, but instead, like, how do you talk about problems in a way that really engages people to become part of the solution?
I love that term. And I love your reflection on that continuous improvement for some people just felt like, you know, a habit trail, like a gerbil wheel. Like, what, were we just going to be on this endless thing? And that really struck me, that it's a tough term, and it's a tough kind of realm to get across, like process improvement, continuous improvement. I mean, it just, for some people, it's eye rolling, you know, it doesn't touch the soul at all. And I think that constructive discontent really resonated with me, or reminded me of another term another group used called positive deviance. You know, when they found one person was succeeding, so what's the positive deviance and what do we learn from that? How are they doing it better than others? But
I love that term.
Yeah. And yours is this great paradox of constructive, this positive discontent. You know, like, it's constructive, but it's based on what are we discontented with. So anyway, I think that it's really good to address language in this realm, because it can get on the geeky side, and people can just, you know, not understand it.
Yeah, well, especially in our work, you know, our mission is to shrink the time between disaster and recovery. And that is all about, for us, it's about helping people and helping people resume a sense of normalcy and dignity and getting back with their lives. And if that is really kind of the core of what we're doing, having language that around process improvement and continuous improvement that is emotional and resonates with people creates a stronger connection to the mission. And ultimately, I think helps more people buy into this concept of, like, always trying to get a little bit better, week after week, month after month, year after year, instead of it feeling like this like almost like antiseptic or sort of like disconnected process to what we actually do and care about.
Yeah, I mean, on a sort of a antiseptic level, it can be, well, it's cycle time reduction. That's what we're about. It's like, well, that's not driving the hearts and minds of others. So yeah,
Yeah.
you know, you connected it. You know, you weren't just building houses. Your outcome was a homecoming. You really connected it to that, what was happening to the people going into it. You know, they were having a homecoming. So I appreciated just the connection to the reality of what you were doing. I know one thing that you struggle with is this huge fluctuation in your volunteer workforce. And I think you described it goes from hundreds down to a handful. You go through the later part of the summer, through the holidays, with just bare bones. So one thing you started early on doing was just building houses when you had the manpower, and then they'd leave. And you said it kind of got depressing to see the houses just sit there. So you had to rethink how to manage your labor force. So what would you say were like the best changes that you made to help you manage such a generous but unreliable workforce?
Yeah, sure. So I think one of them is really, one of the changes that we made was really understanding the volunteer process and making that as clear as possible, not just for volunteers, but for our team, so that we always had a forecast of who was coming and when. You know, we're not the type of organization where we encourage people to just show up and start working, because of the nature of our work. if we did that, people would show up to start working and we wouldn't be adequately prepared for them. And therefore, it would likely be a waste of their time. And so having people register in advance, understanding when they're coming, staying in really good communication so that we know if their numbers are going to change at all, helps us with labor planning. The second thing that it does is, as we build out schedules for houses, we can look at our volunteer numbers in the next 30, 60, 90 days and understand what portions of each house we can use volunteer labor on, and what portions we maybe can just use portions of our team, or maybe we need to subcontract some pieces out depending on what numbers look like. I think the goal for us is that we don't, when we start a house, we don't want to have a lot of days where there's nothing happening there. It's demoralizing for the team. This goes without saying, it's really hard for the homeowner to not see progress every day. And it also adds a lot of extra cost. Or waste. The Japanese word for that is muda, to the process. And so trying to schedule as tightly as possible so that the house isn't sitting empty for periods of time during the construction process. So I think the combination of really clearly defining the volunteer process, plus also improving our scheduling and forecasting and understanding the labor for the job before we start it, help to take a lot of that variability out of the process.
And you stopped, you didn't necessarily jump in and build a house unless you knew you had the labor to keep it rolling.
Yeah, that's right. And so before we start every house, we have a clear scope of work, a schedule for how long it's going to take, who's going to do each step of the process. And then we track every day and every week, how are we progressing on the budget versus the actual, how are we progressing on the actual schedule. And making sure every day we know, are we ahead, are we behind? And then if we're behind, how do we catch up? And so, really digging into the actual planning and tracking of projects, I think helped us a lot as well. It's certainly not a perfect process still. I feel very much like it's a work in progress, but we're getting better and better at that.
Yeah, there's different industries that have to deal with a variable workforce, but I'm pretty sure you're on the extreme end of a variable workforce, and no, it definitely sounds like you've made some great changes to that.
Yeah. I think the other piece I just want to highlight too is again, really planning through and thinking about the best way to utilize volunteers so that when they show up, we have all of the tools and materials they need. We try to provide really good hands-on training for them so that when they're at the site and they're asked to hang drywall or install flooring or paint a wall, that they have been trained so that they feel comfortable going out and spending their time spending their time well on the job site and not feeling like they don't have the confidence or the skills to do the work. And so the training piece of it helps a lot as well.
And I think from reading your book, you really started to sort of chunk out what are the different tasks and what needs skilled labor and what doesn't. And one of your discoveries was not everything needs skilled labor. So, how do we turn, I think you were able to do what you called roughing out the plumbing, and that you could do with a volunteer before you got people who actually were trained plumbers in. Am I describing it right?
Yeah, at one point we did it that way. We've certainly changed the process now, but I think the big thing that Toyota helped us with initially is we thought about how do we make the process more predictable for us, and how do we figure out when do we use skilled and licensed labor versus volunteer labor, was this whole notion of standardized versus non-standardized work. And so in most houses that are flood impacted or disaster impacted, there's the initial phase of gutting the house, and then you treat it for mold. And then you need to bring in licensed electricians and plumbers. Usually you have to bring in someone who does roofing work and foundation work. At some of our sites, we have framing crews. At other sites, we'll hire a framing contractor to come out and really just make sure that the mechanical, electrical, plumbing system, and then, the whole house itself is dried in properly. So we get it from this sort of non-standardized condition, because every house is going to look look a little bit different after a disaster to a much more standardized position where all of those processes have been done. And now we can bring in volunteer labor that can help with insulation and drywall and painting and flooring, doing a lot of the interior finish work that still requires a certain level of skill and training for people to be able to do it, but not the level of training that, you know, is required to put it in a new air conditioning system or run new electrical wires.
So listening to you talk and just looking at your journey, you know, from just sort of showing up, you know, how can I help? And here you are talking about, you know, what's the standard work for, you know, roughing out the plumbing or doing the gutting and then the demolding. Like what's the process? When do you bring in workers? I know you cut the time from building a house from 181 days down to 61 days, which is stunning. And then, you know, looking at this, and I've met folks from Turner Construction, and I know that they got involved in helping you, but it was clear that, you know, the methods you developed could have an impact on the construction industry as a whole. Like I looked at the way you reduced the time to build a wall, you know. So what do you think could be your greatest contribution to the construction industry?
Oh boy. That's a great question. I still consider myself really a novice and very much like learning. And so I think if anything, our greatest contribution to our partners, regardless of what sector they're in, is this whole notion of constructive discontent and building a culture where people talk about problems. Because once you get to that point as an organization or a company, like you're sort of at the point where anything's possible, you know, but until people get to that point, their great ideas aren't going to be heard, or the problems that they're seeing on their respective shop room floors aren't going to get solved. And if they're not, it creates these challenges in the workday and challenges with workflow that can kind of suck a lot of joy out of the work that they're doing day in and day out. So I don't know that any contribution that I have with respect to construction will ever be all that great, but I do think this whole concept of like changing the culture is really, really important.
Well, I think you are completely selling yourself short, that you guys have done amazing stuff that I just don't think happens in construction. I mean, you know, anyone that's had contractors at their house will tell you how slow everything goes. So I know that the culture is foundational, but I keep thinking, but you have methods now of, you know, building walls that are just so much faster than what people consider possible for building a wall. But I do agree with you, the culture is foundational.
Yeah. And, you know, I guess a couple things that have been really helpful for us that I can highlight. I think learning with Turner how to do panelized construction for some of the, you know, structural framing components was really helpful. You know, this idea that you could build a jig, drop pieces of wood in it that are of a certain length, use a nail gun to assemble the wall, and then stand it up in a matter of minutes was pretty cool, you know. Like,
Yeah.
watching that whole thing play out. In fact, I watched it play out about a year and a half ago in a ballroom in San Diego, and we had a bunch of executives from Farmers Insurance who were volunteering with us at this golf event that they were having in California. And we had a couple of jigs. We had a whole bunch of pre-cut wood, nail guns in the hands of super type A, really amazing executives, and just got a ton of work done in a very short amount of time. And I think people were really, really energized and excited that they could do that from afar. And, you know, ultimately we shipped or our partner UPS shipped the panels back to New Orleans, and they went into a house here. But you know, those are sort of the really fun moments where you say, like, how can we take what is a typical sort of construction experience and transport it and drop it into a new environment, and people still can have this opportunity to really meaningfully contribute.
Yeah, that's lovely. And a great example of learning by doing and really causing people to step back and go, wow, to what's possible.
Yeah.
That's a nice description. And I love the description of your company as focused on both recovery and resilience. That really struck me. because as part of your journey, you realized that, disasters, hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, earthquakes, they're all increasing. And you quoted a really sobering FEMA stat of responding to 47 disasters in 1997, contrasted with 242 disasters in 2011. And as you expanded your network and helped people in Mississippi and Houston and New Jersey, you realize that we are, as a nation and obviously beyond, woefully unprepared for disasters. And that's where resilience comes in. And you had a great description of feeling both despondent and energized. And I kind of want to ask you what you're doing with that paradox. One of your values is to share what you've learned. And what are you currently working on that will help, in your mind, with our nation's general preparation for disaster?
Yeah. So, I think we're at a point in the US where it is extremely rare to meet someone who either hasn't been directly impacted by a disaster or hasn't had someone in their immediate family or friend network who's been impacted by a disaster. The frequency of disasters is greater. They're happening in places where people would never expect to be faced with the disaster. And I think as a country, we've sort of woken up to the fact that this is not just an issue for states that are, at risk of a hurricane or places that are at risk of a fire. It's kind of everywhere. And as an organization, candidly, we just got sick of just responding. We said we feel like we're just becoming like a giant Band-Aid, and we've got to get to the root cause of this, which is helping people really understand and mitigate their risk. I think there's a couple of things, and certainly a lot that I could talk about, and I won't get too like geeky or too angry about some of the stuff that's going on. But I think the reality is that there are existing risk maps that are out there that are available to the public that are just they're inaccurate. So that's the first problem, is that people don't really understand what their risk is in some of the places where they live. So two is they don't have the right level of insurance. And because they don't understand what their risk is, they don't understand what their insurance levels should be. Or even worse, they can't afford insurance. Or they can afford insurance, but it's not insurance that's that great coverage, or maybe the company doesn't have a great rate, a grade. It's like there are these other problems that exist. And people often say to me, well, shouldn't those people just move and go somewhere else or live in a place that has insurance? And I said, well, we're talking about a lot of low income, moderate income people who don't have another choice. They don't have the financial freedom to pick up and move to a new community, or their community doesn't have any other place for them to live. So they're kind of stuck where they are. And so the combination of people not understanding their risk and then not having the right insurance or not being able to afford the right insurance gets us to where we are now. So a lot of what we're trying to do is get out into communities using maps from some of our really great partners who do this risk analysis for insurance companies, and help us pinpoint areas across the country that are really at significant risk of a wind or water or fire event, and target our training in those communities. We used to do a lot of just in-person training, but in the last 12 months, we've started to put a lot more of it online through these kind of cool, fun, easy to understand short videos to help people kind of really deeply understand like the difference between flood and homeowners and what the cost could mean if there was a disaster in their community. So those are some of the things that we're doing in communities before disaster to promote resilience.
I think you mentioned in the book that you had been trying to support legislation that would help FEMA get access to people's records, like deeds and taxes and things like that, the documentation that they need to get financial help, which, surprise, got destroyed in their home. So the reality of people who have lost their homes don't have all of that. So in order to get that money from FEMA or from HUD, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, the government money, that's another thing that, to your point, that could happen upstream, so that people aren't in that position once disaster strikes. So you're right. Root cause, you've been going upstream. Like, let's not be the Band-Aid. Let's go further up so this doesn't happen. And on a side note, I live in a house that is 249 years old, and there's a 200-year flood rule for requiring insurance. So there's been no flood. We're not required, but you've witnessed 500-year floods, 1,000-year floods. So I think I'm going to go get some insurance.
Yeah, I hope you do. It's really amazing how affordable the flood insurance is if you're not in a flood zone. So if it's not required and it's not mandatory, it's not going to be that expensive either.
Yeah, I said to my husband, he's like, well, if there's a flood, then, it would happen to other people before it happened to us. And I was like, yeah, but I don't think it costs that much. Like, why wouldn't you want to at least be prepared? So anyway, before it was, how can we avoid paying this? And I think now it's like, well, why are we avoiding paying this? Like, this is all around us. Like you said, the flood maps are all changing. We're on a rise, but we're, on a pond and there's an ocean nearby. So it's all in play. It's all in flux.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really a critically important piece. I'm so pleased that you're going to go get flood insurance.
I know that, and sending my whole family down to help you. Yes, I am so on board. So is there anything that I didn't ask you that you would like to tell our listeners?
Yeah. So I guess a couple of things. One is, in New Orleans, we've been developing a lot of opportunity housing. Those are homes either for sale or for rent, mostly infill projects in neighborhoods where there is a lot of devastation, and we've helped families rebuild their homes, but there's still kind of a lot of pockets in those areas. And one of our projects that we're currently working on that we're really excited about is that we're building a 50-unit net zero or zero energy building right next to our office. And so we're trying to turn some of our core capabilities into addressing housing related needs in some of the communities where we work. So that's been really fun and interesting to develop a building that's so energy efficient that will have solar panels and backup battery storage, that if the power were to go out here, people could still live in the building with this backup power source that we have. And the other thing that's really exciting about it is that residents, if they follow our recommendations for energy usage, will have to pay little or no monthly power bill. And so for low income and very low income people who will live in the building, that $80 to $100 that they're going to save every month means that then they can turn around and invest that money in themselves, and medical bills and eating well and taking care of themselves. So it's another project that we're working on that is sort of connected to our work, but that I just wanted to highlight.
Yeah, that's lovely. I was impressed touring Japan recently at how many organizations are really looking ahead to how do we create, zero carbon footprint? How do we replace some of the materials we're working with to use recycled? How do we, just looking ahead as you are to how do we just reduce impact on people?
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, now they're going to have more money for investing in themselves, which is lovely. The book has been a wonderful read, as I mentioned, and just sparked a million ideas for both myself, for our own company, for others. It's just the most inspiring book I've read this year, probably in the past year. So I thank you so much for taking the time to write that. You're obviously got a lot going on. So I know that writing books is hard. It takes a lot of time.
Well, thank you. We had a good team that helped us a lot. So, it's always important to reflect on what we've learned. And I think this whole idea of if we really care about our clients, we have to share what we've learned, and some of those lessons were really painful. And I hope that others who read the book can avoid some of those more painful lessons and just jump to the good stuff, step over all of those mistakes that we stepped right into, and just become more efficient and effective.
I love that that's one of your core values, to share what you've learned. we have a different way of saying it. We say steal shamelessly. If somebody's figured this out, just take it and run with it. Like you said, no need to fall on your face if somebody else has figured out how to avoid that.
I appreciate the way that you all express that. That's great. I'm going to steal shamelessly from you now.
Good. Do it. So Liz, how can someone find you or communicate with you if they want to do that?
Oh yeah, that's great. So they can check out our website, which is SBP, as in St. Bernard Project, sbpusa.org, or they can email me directly. And my email address is lmccartney, so spelled just like Paul, lmccartney at sbpusa.org.
That's classy, just like Paul. That's good. I usually say I'm Liz Swan, and the last name is just like the bird. It's just, cut to the chase. You've been listening to the Just in Time Cafe podcast. My guest today has been Liz McCartney, founder and CEO of SBP, co-author of Getting Home, and inspiration for anyone trying to figure out how to make a difference in the world. Thank you so much for visiting the cafe today, Liz. It's been an honor.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed our conversation.
This month, we want to highlight our lean-only training. This is a comprehensive 16-hour course with 3 phases: determine current state, design future state, and build a lean culture. Great for people who prefer using PDCA instead of DMAIC to create better processes. Also, check out our latest Wonder Woman of Quality, Holly Jensen. She's hosting the Lean Washington Conference coming up this October 8th and 9th. It's a fantastic event. I've attended that event, I think, 7 years. Every year they've had it. And if you've ever wondered if you were getting the most out of your fishbone diagram, tune in September 18th at 11 Pacific for Elizabeth's awesome webinar.
And join us at the cafe next month, where I get to interview some more amazing healthcare leaders that we met on our Japan study trip, Lori Fiorica and Hillary Hellman. We are still reflecting and learning from what we took away from that trip.
So thanks for spending some quality time with us here at the Just in Time Cafe.
See you in October. It's Tracy's favorite month.
It is. Can't wait.